You might have heard of it before, mostly because of the Mothman legend. That's what drew me here in the first place. I was a journalist back then, specializing in urban legends and unexplained phenomena. Nothing sensationalist, just deep dives into the history of haunted places, cryptid sightings, and folklore. My work was well-researched, grounded, skeptical, but open-minded. That's why, when I found myself renting an old house on the outskirts of town while researching Mothman reports, I didn't think twice about staying there. It was a two-story Victorian home, built in the late 1800s, with sloping wooden floors and a draft that howled through the narrow hallways at night. The place had been sitting empty for years. The real estate agent told me it was because of foundation issues, but the price was suspiciously low. I took it anyway, thinking I could handle a few creaky floorboards. I moved in during late October, the kind of crisp autumn where the leaves look like burning embers scattered across the ground. The house smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic, like pennies left in water. It was mostly empty, save for a few pieces of antique furniture the previous owner had left behind. A heavy oak dresser in the bedroom, an old roll-top desk in the study, and a massive wooden armoire in the hallway. But there was one piece of furniture that stood out, a small, unassuming nightstand beside the bed, its single drawer slightly ajar. I didn't think much of it at first. The nightstand was sturdy, unremarkable, though the wood was darker than the rest of the furniture in the house. That first night, as I settled in, I kept hearing faint sounds, almost like whispering. A soft, unintelligible murmur. I chalked it up to the wind and exhaustion from the long drive. But then, just as I was about to fall asleep, the whispering grew louder. It wasn't coming from the walls. It wasn't outside. It was coming from the nightstand. I sat up, every hair on my arms standing on end. The sound wasn't words exactly, more like breathy hisses, layered over one another like 1,000 voices speaking at once but saying nothing. I reached out, hesitant, and slowly pulled the drawer open. Inside, there was nothing. Just an empty, dust-lined space. The whispering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, almost suffocating. I stared into the drawer, waiting for something, anything, to explain what I had just heard. But there was nothing. Just an empty space where the whispers had been. I told myself it was fatigue, my brain playing tricks on me. I closed the drawer and turned over, trying to push it out of my mind. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the whispering started again. This time, the drawer slid open by itself. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, the occurrences became more frequent. The drawer would open on its own, sometimes just a crack, sometimes all the way. I started finding things inside, small, seemingly insignificant objects. A rusty key, a torn piece of paper with illegible handwriting, a fragment of a photograph that looked burnt at the edges. Each time I found something, I would throw it away. And each time, the whispering grew louder. Then, one night, I made the mistake of listening. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending this wasn't happening. But I leaned in, close enough to feel the cool air drifting out of the open drawer, and I listened. At first, it was the same breathy hisses, layered and indistinct. But then, beneath the noise, I began to hear something else, words. Not yet, it whispered. I froze. Not yet, it repeated, the voices overlapping, growing distorted. That's when the room went cold. Not the kind of cold you get from a drafty house, but a bone-deep, unnatural cold that stole the breath from my lungs. I pulled away, slamming the drawer shut, but the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, more frantic. The house groaned, the walls creaking as if something massive was shifting inside them. I grabbed my things and ran out of the room. That night, I slept in my car. The next morning, I went back inside, determined to get rid of the nightstand. But when I stepped into the bedroom, my stomach dropped. The drawer was wide open, and inside was something new. A piece of paper, yellowed and torn, with just 3 words scrawled across it in red ink. You brought it. I don't know what I brought. I don't know what that thing is. But I do know one thing, the whispering hasn't stopped. And now, No matter where I go, I hear it. I should have left. That's the rational thing, right? Just pack up and leave the house behind. But I didn't. Something about that message, you brought it, kept gnawing at me. I hadn't brought anything with me except my laptop, some clothes, and my research notes. And yet, whatever was in that nightstand, whatever was whispering to me, seemed convinced that I had. The whispering followed me through the house now. Before, it had been contained to the bedroom, to that damn nightstand. But that morning, as I stepped into the kitchen to make coffee, I heard it, soft, sibilant murmurs curling around the edges of the room. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the space beneath the old wooden cabinets. I turned in slow circles, gripping the countertop, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. Not yet, it whispered. I backed out of the kitchen, nearly tripping over my own feet. The whispering stopped as soon as I reached the hallway. Like it had never been there. I didn't eat that day. Didn't sleep either. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something waiting in the dark. Not a presence exactly, more like an awareness. Something watching. Listening. I left every light in the house on that night, and still, the shadows seemed to stretch too long, too deep, pooling in the corners where the dim yellow bulbs couldn't quite reach. At around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The drawer sliding open. I didn't move. I told myself I wouldn't look. That if I just stayed under the blankets, if I ignored it, it would stop. But I knew better. It wouldn't stop. It was waiting for me to acknowledge it. I turned my head, just slightly, and through the dim light I saw it. The drawer. Open. And this time, there was something inside. I swallowed hard and forced myself to sit up. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave it alone, but my hand moved on its own, reaching toward the dark, gaping mouth of the nightstand. My fingers brushed against something smooth, thin. Paper. I lifted it out. Another scrap, aged and yellowed, the edges curling. There were more words scrawled across it, this time in smeared black ink. You let it out. My stomach lurched. The house groaned. A low, shuddering creak echoed from the hallway. I sat frozen, the paper still clutched between my fingers, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Then, from somewhere just beyond the bedroom door, I heard it. A soft shuffle of feet against the wooden floor. Not whispering. Not the wind. Something moving. Slow. Deliberate. I strained to listen, trying to convince myself it was the house settling. That it was nothing. But then the footsteps came again, closer this time. I held my breath. The hallway light flickered. A shadow passed beneath the door. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed. Minutes? Hours? I didn't dare move. But eventually, the footsteps faded. The light stopped flickering. The air returned to normal. I knew, then, that something had changed. That whatever had been whispering to me through the drawer was no longer just whispering. It was here now. It was inside the house. And I had let it out. Morning came, but the air in the house felt wrong, heavy, stagnant, like something unseen was pressing against the walls. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, gripping that scrap of paper. You let it out. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind wouldn't slow down. Every creak of the floor, every distant groan of shifting would send a fresh jolt of fear through me. I had made a mistake staying here. I had been playing at being a rational investigator, ignoring every instinct that told me to run. But now I knew I had stayed too long. I threw my things into a duffel bag, grabbed my car keys, and made for the door, my breath tight in my chest. The moment my fingers touched the doorknob, I froze. Across the room, the nightstand drawer was open again. Wide open. Mocking me. Inside, something new waited in the darkness of that hollow space. A small square of paper. No, not paper. A Polaroid photograph. I stepped forward reluctantly, feeling as if I were sleepwalking towards something I didn't want to see. The photo was old, the colors faded, washed out. But the image was unmistakable. It was this room. My room. The same bed. The same nightstand. But there was one difference. A woman was sitting at the edge of the mattress, her back to the camera, her long black hair hanging in tangled knots down a white nightgown. And she was facing the drawer. A sharp chill worked its way up my spine as my eyes flicked from the photograph to the bed, expecting, dreading, to see someone sitting there. Nothing. Just the empty, wrinkled covers where I had been moments ago. But something was off. My breath hitched, my fingers gripping the photo so hard the edges curled. That's when I saw it. The reflection. In the glass cover of the nightstand, her face was staring back at me. It wasn't right. Not blurred, not distorted, just wrong. Her mouth was stretched too wide, her lips peeling back unnaturally to reveal too many teeth, each jagged and sharp. And her eyes, God, her eyes weren't eyes at all. Just deep, gaping voids, endless and consuming. I barely had time to register the sickening twist in my gut before I noticed something worse. Her head was turning. I didn't think. I dropped the Polaroid, staggering back as my heart slammed against my ribs. The air in the room turned icy, my breath coming in short, white puffs. Behind me, the wooden floor let out a slow, deliberate creak. I refused to turn. I couldn't. My body locked up, paralyzed between fight and flight. But then the whispering started again, low and breathy, curling around me like cold fingers. It wasn't coming from the drawer this time. It was coming from right behind me. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move. I ran, bolting from the room, the whispering growing louder, chasing me down the hall, spilling through the walls. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, through the front door, down the porch steps. The second my feet hit the gravel of the driveway, the whispering stopped. I collapsed against the car, chest heaving, hands trembling as I fumbled with the door handle. My only thought was to get as far away from that house as possible. I wasn't investigating anymore. I wasn't trying to understand. I just needed to go. The moment the car roared to life, I tore down the road, my knuckles bone white against the wheel. The farther I got, the more the panic began to fade, replaced by a sickening sense of relief. I had escaped. Whatever was in that house was behind me now. And then I heard it. Soft, barely there. A sound so faint I could almost convince myself it wasn't real. The whispering. Not in the house. Not behind me. Inside the car. The whispering filled the car, seeping into the hum of the tires against the road, slipping between the creaks of the old dashboard, hiding in the rush of wind against the windows. It was everywhere and nowhere, a sound that seemed to exist just outside the range of full comprehension. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, my breath ragged, my knuckles white as I pressed my foot harder against the gas pedal. The narrow, tree-lined road blurred past me, the dense woods on either side stretching endlessly into the night. The whispering didn't grow louder, but it didn't fade either. It was constant, a presence woven into the very air, into the space around me, as if it had settled inside my own mind. I risked a glance into the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, just two thin red streaks disappearing into the dark. But my eyes weren't looking at the road anymore. They were drawn to the back seat. The space there was wrong. The shadows too deep, shifting unnaturally as if something sat just beyond the reach of the dim overhead light. My heart slammed against my ribs as I forced myself to look away, fixing my gaze straight ahead. I wouldn't check again. I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. The whispering curled around my ears, insidious and patient. I reached for the volume knob on the radio, cranking it up to drown out the sound. Static hiss from the speakers. No music. No voices. Just an empty, hollow signal stretching into nothing. I twisted the dial, flipping through stations. Each one was the same: static, silence, static, silence. Then, in the middle of the white noise, I heard something else. A voice. My voice. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was faint, buried beneath the hiss of the radio, but unmistakable. I was speaking, but I wasn't speaking now. My lips were shut, locked tight in fear, but there I was, murmuring, whispering, saying things I didn't remember saying. Fragments of words, half-formed sentences, nothing that made sense. Not yet, my voice crackled through the speakers, distorted, stretched thin like a tape recording played too slow. You let it out. I slammed the radio off. The whispering didn't stop. I needed to get to town. Now. The road twisted ahead, a sharp turn through the trees. I barely saw it in time. My hands jerked the wheel, tires screeching as the car veered dangerously close to the guardrail. My stomach lurched as I fought for control, the vehicle swaying violently before finally straightening. I let out a breath, chest heaving, my fingers numb from gripping the wheel so hard. My body trembled with adrenaline, my mind racing with the knowledge that something had almost made me crash. And then I saw the figure. Standing in the middle of the road, just ahead. I barely had time to react. My foot slammed against the brake, the tires skidding against the pavement. The car shuddered to a halt, the headlights illuminating the shape before me. It was a woman. Her back was turned, long, black hair hanging limp and tangled over a white nightgown, the fabric stained dark at the hem. My breath hitched, my pulse thundering. I knew that shape. I had seen it before. In the photograph. She didn't move. Didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the car that had nearly plowed into her. Just stood there, motionless, facing away, her bare feet planted in the middle of the empty road. The whispering around me changed, shifting, twisting, growing almost eager. It wanted me to do something. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then, slowly, impossibly, her head began to turn. Not her body. Just her head. It twisted unnaturally, inch by inch, rotating far past the limits of bone and muscle, her hair falling away from her face as it turned, too far too far, until she was staring at me upside down. Her mouth stretched open, too wide, splitting at the corners as if her skin were tearing, her lips curling back into something that wasn't a smile. And then she lurched forward. I reacted on instinct. My foot slammed the gas. The car shot forward. I didn't think, didn't check, didn't care what happened to her. I just drove. The tires roared against the pavement, the trees whipping past me in a blur. I kept going, hands shaking, eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to look back. The whispering was laughing now, breathy and delighted, filling the space around me, filling me. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The road opened up ahead. Town. The bright lights of the main street cut through the darkness, neon signs glowing in the distance. I nearly sobbed with relief, the sight of civilization snapping me back into reality. I veered into the nearest parking lot, a gas station, old and worn, but real. Solid. I stumbled out of the car, my legs weak beneath me, my breath coming in uneven gasps. The air was normal here. Heavy with the smell of gasoline and damp pavement, but normal. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, hands braced against the car, trying to steady myself. My mind was a storm of thoughts, memories, warnings I hadn't heeded. You brought it. You let it out. The whispers had stopped, but I knew this wasn't over. Then I noticed something. The driver's side window. A single handprint pressed against the glass. Small. Smudged. From the inside. I stood there, gasping, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear, staring at the handprint on the inside of the car window. It was small, too small for mine, too delicate to be my own. The imprint was smeared, the fingers dragging slightly downward, as if something, had pressed their hand against the glass while I was driving. While I was still in the car. I reached up, hesitantly, pressing my own fingers against the print, but the moment my skin touched the glass, a sharp, sudden bang erupted from inside the vehicle. The sound sent me stumbling backward, my heart slamming against my ribs as the entire car shook in a deep, unnatural vibration that rattled through the frame, through the tires, through the pavement beneath me. And then, Just as suddenly, silence. I stood frozen, breath ragged, ears straining against the stillness. There was no movement, no whispering, just the distant hum of traffic down the street, the occasional flicker of the gas station sign above me. For the first time since I'd fled that house, I felt like I was back in the real world. But I knew better than to believe it. My hands fumbled in my pocket, fingers curling around my phone as I struggled to hold on to some kind of logic, some kind of safety. I needed help, a motel, a crowded place, people. Something to pull me back into reality. I unlocked my screen, desperate to dial any number, but before I could make a call, the phone died. No warning, no low battery notification. Just a black screen. I let out a sharp breath, frustration boiling beneath the surface of my fear, but before I could process what was happening, a sound broke the silence. A soft click. Not from the car. Not from my phone. From behind me. A cold wave of dread rolled down my spine. Every muscle in my body locked up, every nerve screaming at me to run, don't turn around, just run. But my body didn't listen. I turned. The gas station door was open. Just a crack. My stomach twisted violently. I hadn't seen anyone when I pulled in. The station had looked empty, lifeless, the flickering neon sign barely illuminating the cracked pavement out front. But now the door was ajar, swinging gently as if someone had just stepped inside, or just left. The fluorescent lights inside flickered unevenly, casting long, shifting shadows across the tiled floor. Someone was standing at the counter. I couldn't see them clearly from where I stood, just the outline of a figure. Motionless. Facing forward. A deep, suffocating unease slithered through my gut. I took a slow step closer, my foot scraping against the pavement, and the figure moved. It wasn't a normal movement. It wasn't a flinch, a shift of weight. It turned. Slowly. Deliberately. My breath caught in my throat. The light overhead buzzed, flickering in and out, and for a brief, stuttering second, I saw its face. No. Not a face. The impression of a face, like something trying to mimic human features but failing miserably. The mouth was too wide, the skin stretched impossibly tight, the eyes hollow and black like the inside of a dead thing. My entire body seized in terror. And then, the lights went out. The entire gas station was swallowed in darkness. A sickening wave of vertigo hit me as I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, my pulse hammering against my throat. The whispering started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the car. It was everywhere. The wind. The pavement. The empty streets beyond the gas station lot. A chorus of hushed voices, layered over each other, rising and falling in a breathy, rhythmic murmur. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. Don't listen, don't listen, don't listen. But the voices pressed in, growing more insistent, curling around my head like invisible fingers. Then, the door slammed shut. The whispering stopped. I opened my eyes, chest heaving, my body still braced for something, anything, to lunge at me. But the gas station was empty. No lights. No movement. No figure behind the counter. Just a hollow, silent building staring back at me. My breath rattled in my lungs as I forced myself to move, to stagger toward my car, my fingers fumbling for the door handle. But just as my hand reached for it, I stopped. The handprint was gone. The glass was clean. Perfectly clear, like it had never been touched at all. A sinking feeling twisted in my stomach, deeper and colder than before. And then I saw it. Sitting on the dashboard. Something small. Something I knew, with every part of me, I had not put there. A Polaroid photograph. My entire body tensed as I reached for it, my fingers trembling as they closed around the glossy paper. I lifted it into the dim glow of the gas station sign, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the image. It was a photo of me, sitting in the driver's seat, both hands on the wheel, eyes locked straight ahead. The image was grainy, the colors muted, but the details were unmistakable. But then my gaze drifted. There was something else. Something in the back seat. A shape, barely visible in the shadows, leaning forward just behind my shoulder, just out of the reach of the dim overhead light. My blood turned to ice, my fingers going numb as I clutched the photo in my hands. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. A slow, sickening realization settled into my bones. It wasn't just in the house. It wasn't just in the car. It was inside me now. The realization spread through me like ice water, numbing my limbs, slowing my breath. The thing in the photo, the shape in the back seat, had been there the whole time. I hadn't escaped the house. I hadn't outrun whatever I had let out. It had been with me from the moment I left, from the moment I touched that nightstand drawer, from the moment I listened. My fingers trembled as I clutched the Polaroid, my pulse hammering in my ears, the sound of my own breathing too loud, too uneven, filling the empty space around me like a broken metronome. The whispering wasn't gone. It had just settled deeper, burrowing into the fabric of everything, embedding itself into me. The gas station lights flickered once, a dying gasp of power, but they didn't come back on. The entire lot remained drenched in unnatural darkness, an absence of light so complete it made my skin crawl. The road beyond the station, which should have been bathed in the glow of street lamps and passing headlights, was empty. No cars. No signs of life. Just black pavement stretching endlessly in both directions, disappearing into a void that felt far too vast for a small town street. I turned my head, slowly, toward the store window, bracing myself for what I already knew I would see. My reflection was staring back at me. But something was wrong. It wasn't quite me. The angle was off, the head tilted just slightly too far to one side, the eyes too shadowed, too hollow. My mouth, its mouth, hung open just enough to show teeth. But I wasn't smiling. I wasn't doing anything. I was standing still, my arms slack at my sides, my breath shallow. But the reflection wasn't still. It was moving. Barely. Just a shift, a tremor in the glass. A lean. A microscopic step forward, so slow, so deliberate, as if it was waiting to see if I would notice. And I did. Every nerve in my body screamed, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away, couldn't even blink. Then, it whispered. Not from behind the glass. Not from inside the store. From inside my own head. You brought it. The words slithered through my thoughts, cold and slick, curling like smoke inside my skull. A sensation more than a sound, a knowing rather than a voice. It wasn't talking to me. It was reminding me. A sharp knock against the car window made me jump so violently I nearly dropped the Polaroid. My head snapped toward the sound, my heart seizing in my chest. For a split second, I thought, hoped it was someone real. A person. A passerby. Someone who had finally seen me. But there was no one. No figure, no shadow, no movement. Just the window, cold and fogged, the faint outline of something that had been right there. The glass was clean again, but I knew what I had heard. I knew what had been there. The whispering shifted. Not from the store window. Not from the car. From behind me. The air thickened, pressing in on me, wrapping around my shoulders like invisible hands. My skin prickled, my breath hitching in my throat. I didn't want to turn around. I knew, deep in my bones, that turning around was the worst possible thing I could do. But the weight of its presence was unbearable, suffocating. The longer I stood there, the closer it felt, the colder the air grew, until I could almost feel it breathing against the back of my neck. And then, the reflection moved again. Not a step. Not a tilt. It smiled. The kind of smile that isn't meant for a human face. That's when the lights exploded. A sudden, blinding burst of fluorescent white, the gas station roaring back to life, the hum of electricity deafening. I gasped, staggering back, my hand gripping the car handle as the reflection in the glass snapped back to normal. No wrong angles. No smile. Just me. Shaking, disoriented, alone. The whispering was gone. Everything was normal. I nearly collapsed against the car, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gulps. The street was full again. Cars rolled past, their headlights illuminating the pavement, their tires kicking up mist from the cooling asphalt. The gas station door hung open, the warm glow of the interior spilling onto the pavement, an employee, an actual person, standing behind the counter, flipping through a magazine like nothing had happened. The world had snapped back into place. But I knew the truth. Nothing was normal. The whispering wasn't gone. It was just waiting. I forced my body to move, yanking the car door open, throwing myself inside. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life, the radio blaring static before switching back to an ordinary station, a pop song, something bright, something that didn't belong. I turned it off, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached, staring at the gas station, at the street, at the world that had so suddenly returned to what it was supposed to be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something. That the shift had happened too fast. Too perfectly. My eyes drifted to the dashboard. The Polaroid was gone. I hadn't dropped it. I hadn't let it go. But it was no longer in my hands. It was gone. And in its place, something else had appeared. The nightstand drawer key. I stared at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. The same key I had found in that drawer back in the house. The same key I had thrown away, tossed into the trash, wanting nothing to do with it. And yet, it was here. Sitting in my car. Placed neatly on the dashboard, waiting for me. A slow, cold realization curled around my ribs, squeezing until I could barely breathe. I hadn't left it behind. I had never left any of it behind. The whispering had followed me. It had been inside the house. Then inside the car. Then inside the gas station. Now, it was inside me. The key sat on the dashboard, small and unremarkable, but its presence suffocated the air inside the car. My breath slowed, the world narrowing to just that tiny, rusted object. I had thrown it away. I knew I had. I had seen it disappear into the trash, buried beneath paper and dust, discarded like the meaningless relic I wanted it to be. And yet, it was here. Waiting. As if it had never left. As if it had always belonged to me. My hands hovered over the wheel, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The whispering was silent now, but its absence felt intentional, like a held breath, like something watching, waiting for me to understand. It was never just about the house. Never just about the drawer. The key had always been mine, and I had been carrying it with me since the moment I first heard the whispering slip through the wood of that nightstand. I wanted to scream, to throw the key out the window, to grind it beneath my heel until it snapped in half. But a deeper part of me, a part one didn't recognize, a part that didn't feel like mine, knew it wouldn't matter. The key would come back. The drawer would open again. The whispering would return. Because it wasn't following me. I was bringing it with me. The weight of that truth sank into my chest, heavy and unrelenting, crushing any fragile hope I had that this could be left behind. There was no leaving this behind. No escaping it. The thing in the drawer, the thing in the back seat, the thing in the mirror, it had never been outside of me. It had been waiting to get in. And somehow, I had let it. A knock on the driver's side window shattered my thoughts. I jolted, my pulse spiking, my body rigid with fear before my eyes adjusted to the figure standing outside. A man. Older, with a gas station uniform and a skeptical frown, peering down at me like I was some vagrant who had been sitting there too long. Real. The relief was so overwhelming I almost choked on it. "You alright, buddy?" His voice was gruff, mildly irritated, like he had better things to do than check on some pale, shaky man parked outside his store. "You've been sitting here for a while." I opened my mouth, trying to form words, trying to explain what? That I had been running from something that didn't exist? That I had let something in? The moment I tried to speak, my throat tightened. My mind blanked. I didn't remember driving here. I didn't remember stopping. It was like the last 30 minutes had been wiped clean, replaced. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Yeah. Just tired. The man didn't look convinced, but he wasn't concerned enough to press. He nodded, stepping back toward the station. You staying in town? I hesitated. No. I'm leaving. Good. His voice was flat. Simple. Not the casual good luck of a stranger wishing me a safe drive, but a warning. Like he knew something. I should have asked. I should have pressed him, should have asked what he meant, should have told him everything. But I didn't. Because I was afraid of the answer. Because deep down, I already knew. He walked back inside without another word, leaving me alone with the key, with the silence, with the creeping understanding that no matter where I went, it would go with me. I forced myself to move, shoving the key into the glove compartment and slamming it shut, as if that would make a difference. My fingers shook as I turned the ignition, the car rumbling back to life, the headlights cutting through the thick darkness of the road ahead. I wasn't staying here. I wasn't stopping again. I just needed to keep driving, keep moving, put miles between me and this place, between me and whatever was happening to me. I pulled out onto the highway, the gas station shrinking in my rearview mirror, fading into the night. For a few blessed minutes, there was nothing but the road, the hum of the engine, the rhythmic flicker of passing streetlights. No whispering. No shadows. No faces in the mirror. Just me, moving forward, leaving it all behind. And then the radio turned on by itself. I didn't touch it. My hand was still gripping the wheel, my knuckles white with tension, but the radio crackled to life, the volume climbing on its own, higher and higher until the speakers screamed with static. My breath caught, my body locking up as the noise filled the car, a sound that wasn't just sound, a sound that was inside my head. Then, beneath the static, the whispering returned. Not layered. Not distant. One voice. Right in my ear. Come back. My stomach twisted violently, bile rising in my throat. I reached for the radio, twisting the dial, slamming my palm against the buttons, but nothing changed. The whispering didn't stop. The static didn't break. The voice was inside me now. Come back. Come back. Come back. I slammed on the brakes. The car lurched to a violent stop in the middle of the empty road, tires skidding against pavement, the momentum throwing me forward against the seatbelt. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would split my ribs. The moment the car stopped, the whispering cut out. The static died. Silence. For a long, terrible moment, I just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, head bowed, trying to convince myself that this wasn't happening, that this was all in my head. But then, slowly, I became aware of something else. The glove compartment was open. I didn't open it. I didn't open it. My entire body went cold. The key was gone. I turned my head, slowly, heart pounding so loud it was all I could hear, and my breath caught in my throat. The passenger door was open. I hadn't heard it. I hadn't seen it move. But it was open. Wide, deeping, the blackness outside stretching into something that felt too deep, too empty. I wasn't alone in the car anymore. I never had been. And then, from the back seat, just behind my shoulder, breathing. Shallow. Waiting. The whispering wasn't whispering anymore. It was inside the car. It was inside me. The breath behind me was slow and deliberate, each inhale dragging through the thick silence like something savoring the air between us. My body locked in place, my fingers frozen against the steering wheel, the sweat on my skin turning cold. The whispering had never been this close before, not in the house, not in the gas station, not even in the car when I first heard it slip through the static. This was different. This wasn't something pressing in from the edges, lurking in reflections, teasing me with flickers of movement just out of sight. This was inside. I wanted to turn, to confront whatever had finally pulled itself from the depths of my shadow, but some deep, primal instinct, the kind that had kept our ancestors alive when the dark was full of real monsters, screamed at me to keep my eyes forward. I could feel it there, so close, just behind the passenger seat, the space where no one had ever sat since I started driving. I had felt it before, its presence a distant weight, a breath at the nape of my neck. But now, it was leaning forward. The passenger door still hung open, the night outside impossibly dark, like the absence of space itself. The key was gone, but I didn't need to see it to know where it was. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then, it spoke. "You brought it." The voice wasn't human. Not in the way voices are supposed to be. It was layered, like multiple mouths speaking at once, overlapping, shifting in pitch, some voices too high, others too deep. They slid over each other, twisting and folding, yet somehow, I understood every word. I squeezed my eyes shut, my nails digging into the leather of the wheel. I couldn't turn. I wouldn't. But I had to say something. I had to break whatever this was, push it back before it could pull me further into its world. I didn't bring anything. My voice was barely a whisper, hoarse, weak. I hated how small I sounded. The voices laughed. The sound slithered through the car, crawling over my skin like invisible fingers. My body tensed, my breath hitching as the presence behind me shifted closer. "Yes, you did." Something brushed against my shoulder. My entire body recoiled, a strangled gasp catching in my throat. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to control the shudder racking through me. "You let it out," it continued, the voices rolling together in something that was almost fond. "And now you have to take it back." I shook my head. I don't understand." The breath behind me quickened, as if amused. The car groaned, the weight of something unseen pressing down against the frame. The interior felt smaller, the space around me shrinking, closing in. "Open the drawer." My breath hitched. The drawer. The nightstand. The thing I had left behind. Except I hadn't. It was still here. It had always been here. I sucked in a sharp breath, my heart slamming against my ribs. I was afraid to ask, afraid to know the answer, but the words came out before I could stop them. "Where is it?" Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate creak. The glove compartment. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't touched it. But it was open. And inside, waiting, patient, inevitable, was the drawer. The nightstand drawer. The same old wood. The same dark handle. Sitting inside my car, nestled where my glove compartment should be, as if it had always been there. As if it had never left the house at all. My body refused to move. "Open it," the voices whispered again, coaxing, pleading. I didn't want to. I knew that the moment I touched that handle, something would happen. Something I wouldn't be able to undo. The house had been an illusion of containment, a false sense of boundary. The drawer had never been bound to a place. It was bound to me. But I couldn't sit here forever. And the thing in the back seat knew it. Slowly, my fingers uncurled from the wheel. My breath was shallow, unsteady. The car felt wrong, the air thick, pressing down against my skull, pushing me toward the inevitable. My hand moved toward the drawer. The whispering surged, growing eager, hungry. I gritted my teeth, every part of me screaming don't, but I was already pulling the handle. The drawer slid open. The whispering stopped. I stared. Inside the drawer, nestled in the same layer of dust, sitting in the same empty, hollow space, was a mirror. Not a reflection. A window. I wasn't looking at myself. I was looking at the room. The bedroom. The house I had left behind. And inside the mirror, sitting on the edge of the bed, was me. But it wasn't me. Its head was tilted too far. Its lips were pulled back in something that might have been a smile. And as I watched, the thing in the mirror stood up. It took a step forward. And another. Closer. Closer. Until it was standing at the edge of the glass, until the only thing separating us was the thin, fragile boundary of the drawer. Then it raised its hand and pressed it against the inside of the mirror. A perfect match to my own. The breath behind me was no longer behind me. It was inside my chest. The thing in the mirror opened its mouth, and I whispered, "You brought it." I wasn't in the car anymore. I was in the drawer. The world shattered. Darkness. Silence. And then, the drawer slid shut. Darkness swallowed everything. Not the kind of darkness that comes with closed eyes, not the absence of light in a room, but something heavier, deeper, a void that was not simply empty, it was watching. The world outside the drawer was gone, or maybe I was gone from it. I tried to move, but there was no sensation, no weight to my limbs, no space to navigate. It was like I had been unmade, reduced to a thought, a whisper floating in the black. I wanted to scream, but I had no mouth. And then, something opened. Not the drawer. Something else. A sliver of light peeled through the darkness, thin and unnatural, not daylight, not the warm glow of a room, but a sickly, yellowish haze that pulsed, as if alive. I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone. Something shifted outside the drawer, just beyond the thin veil of space that separated me from whatever had been waiting. My breath, if I still had breath, hitched. The light grew, stretching, widening, until shapes formed within it, flickering and unstable, like an old film playing on a frayed reel. I saw myself. Not in a reflection, not in a photograph, but from somewhere else, somewhere outside. I was standing in the bedroom, beside the nightstand, my posture rigid, my face obscured by shadow. The drawer was open. The real drawer. But I wasn't looking inside it. I was looking at the bed. Someone was sitting there. The woman from the Polaroid. Her head was bent forward, her long black hair draping over her face, her hands resting in her lap as if patiently waiting. The version of me standing beside the drawer didn't move, didn't react, just watched. I could feel something rising within me, a silent scream building in my throat, a desperate, "Don't look, don't look, don't look," but the scene played on, unaffected by my panic. The woman slowly lifted her head. She had no eyes. Two gaping, hollow sockets stared out from beneath her hair, black and endless, like tunnels burrowing into something that should not exist. Her mouth twitched, stretched too wide, a jagged smile pulling at the edges of her cheeks, peeling back flesh that was already splitting. And then, she moved. Not toward the real me. Toward the me outside the drawer. I tried to pull away, to close my eyes, but I had no control. The scene kept unfolding, the woman rising, stepping forward, inching toward the body that now belonged to something else. The whispering returned, not from her, not from the air, but from inside me, threading through my thoughts like a parasite burrowing into my skull. "You brought it." The figure standing beside the drawer did nothing. It let her come. And then I saw it. The truth. I had never escaped. The thing wearing my face had stepped out of this place the moment I had opened the drawer. I hadn't been running from it. I had been chasing it, trying to reclaim something that had already been taken. The whispering had never been calling out to me. It had been calling for me. It had wanted me to see, to understand, and now I did. I had been inside the drawer since the moment I first listened. The sliver of yellow light flickered again, pulsing, unstable, and I felt something change. The walls of this space, asterisk asterisk if it even had walls, asterisk asterisk began to tighten, like the universe was collapsing inward. The whispering turned into a hum, rhythmic and hypnotic, and the woman in the room, or whatever had once been a woman, was inches away from my reflection, her mouth stretched wide, wide, wide. I had one chance. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. This thing had taken my place, but I wasn't the first. Others had been here before me, trapped in this shifting, hungry void, swallowed whole by the drawer. But something had let me see. Something had pulled back the curtain just enough to show me the truth. If I had been listening to it all along, maybe it had been listening to me too. I'd focused on the drawer. The real drawer. The nightstand. The wood. The handle. I reached for it, Not with my hands, because I had none, but with thought, with will, with everything I still had left that belonged to me. The hum shuddered as if something had noticed, something that didn't want me to move. The space around me trembled, the whispering growing sharp, urgent. I pulled. The drawer slammed shut. And I woke up. I was on the floor of the bedroom, sprawled across the old wooden planks, my body drenched in cold sweat, my breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. My vision blurred, the world around me swimming back into focus. I was here. In the house. In my body. And the drawer was closed. I didn't move at first. I didn't trust that this was real. I lay there, staring at the nightstand, at the thin seam where the drawer met the frame. The room was silent. No whispering. No shifting shadows. Just stillness. I forced myself up, my muscles aching, my limbs weak. My head spun, my pulse still thrumming wildly in my ears. But I didn't stop. I grabbed my bag, my keys, everything, and I left. I didn't care if I left the door unlocked, if I left my research, if I left my damn car behind. I needed to be gone. The last thing I saw before stepping outside was the nightstand. The drawer was shut, but the key was back on top. I ran. I never told anyone what happened. There was no way to explain it. No proof, no evidence, nothing that made sense outside of the house, outside of that room. I never went back to Point Pleasant. I never researched the house. I never tried to understand. Because deep down, I already knew. The drawer would open again. For someone else. For someone who listened. For someone who brought it.